we're talking about bandwidth control with the ClearFlow core gateway controller. So this is part 2. So far we've already set up our multiple LANs, so we're going to have a main network and a guest network. We need to look at the DHCP. We mentioned that briefly in the other videos, but I just want to recap it before we actually set an IP limit. Then the third stage will be, as we've done in the last video, is to set up a group that we're going to force a particular AP or group of APs to broadcast on. And then, as I mentioned just now, we're going to set up an IP limit. So let's talk about DHCP first, and the IP limit will be linked to that. So jump back on the software, go to your DHCP service, which is in network, and then DHCP settings. Now you'll see, hopefully you've got 2 LANs. You should have already set up the second LAN. So you'll see, if you click on LAN 2, because for the purposes of this, that's the one we're going to use to restrict. If you remember, we've assigned LAN 2 to ETH03, which we've connected an Air 3 to, and this is the one that's going to broadcast our reduced bandwidth. So we need to make some decisions about which IP addresses we're going to limit. So we could simply just restrict any IP addresses that are on this network, and that's typically the simplest way to do it. So the default starting IP is .100. So if you remember from the multiple LAN video, we set LAN 2 up as 172.15.0, and then .1 is the starting IP. So within here we can choose which IP addresses we're going to assign. So you might remember from the DHCP video, so it's just a quick recap. The reason I'm recapping it is because when we set our IP limit, the way the system works is, in order to reduce bandwidth, you would basically reduce bandwidth to a group of IP addresses, and that's obviously managed via DHCP. So to keep it simple, we're going to keep it at 100 as a starting IP. So we need to remember that when we get to the IP limit. I'm only going to allow 100 clients at a time, so to keep the network, so it's not going to be overloaded, because perhaps there's only 1 or 2 APs. I'm going to keep the lease time low. So when you look at the lease time there, it comes by default set to 120. I'm actually going to reduce that to 60. So I'm only going to allow each user to have an hour. You might even want to set it to 30 and just allow them to have half an hour. All depends. So the choice is yours, or the client's. And then the other settings are, we have to remember our main DNS, which we've used 192.168.1.1, because that's the IP address of the main ISP router. Again, that's mentioned in the full DHCP video. Make sure you set that, and your secondary DNS can be Google's public, which is 8.8.8. So once you've made those changes, click Save. It should tell you, it will complain if there's a problem and you've duplicated something that you shouldn't have done. Now we're going to set out our IP limit rule. So we need to remember, we can always refer back to it of course, the settings that we've just done. So if you close the network menu and go down to bandwidth control, which is another main menu option, and select IP limit, and now we're going to create a rule that will restrict a group of IP addresses. So you'll expect there isn't probably likely to be one set already, and actually you can set multiple IP limit rules if you need to. So we're going to click on add, because we're going to create a new rule. So when the pop-up window appears like this, we need to make sure we set it to enabled, obviously, for the thing to be actually in place. And now we're going to choose an IP range. So now this refers back to our LAN 2 subnet 192.15.0, and then which IP addresses we're going to restrict. Now if you remember, I set the starting IP at 100 and I've only allowed 100 IP addresses, so realistically we only need to restrict .100 to .200. So if I insert this in now, 172.15.0.100, you've got to put a closing, a top end. It's showing the full field. It does actually help you and indicate that within the software, as you'll see below the field. So 172.15.0.100 172.15.0.200. Okay, so we've created an IP range, so anybody or any client wireless device that gets given an IP address within that field is going to get a reduced bandwidth. Well, they will do when we finish what we're doing. Moving on to the next 2 fields, these are where you're going to select how much bandwidth you're going to allow for upload and download. So you need to be a bit careful, because this is measured in kilobytes per second. So just a quick note on it, kilobytes, there's 8 bits in a byte. So just to keep it simple, if you want to set it to 1 meg, you set it to 125 kilobytes. So 1 megabyte, 125 kilobytes. So it's quite simple. In fact, we're going to do that. We're going to say 125 kilobytes or 1 meg upload, and we're going to let them have 4 meg download. So I'm going to set that to 500. So they're useful figures to remember. 125 kilobytes is 1 megabyte. Okay. Oh, sorry, 1 megabit. So the only other things you might need to decide, or you will need to decide, is whether you're going to share that bandwidth or you're going to leave it to be exclusive per client or per user. So very simply, if you select shared, it means that any users that are on there will share that 4 meg that we've assigned to them or we've allowed to them. Whereas if it's exclusive, each wireless client device will be allowed to have 4 meg. That's all it is basically. So once you've decided how you're going to set it and how much bandwidth you're going to allow these users to have, you just click save, and now you'll see that your rule that you set has now appeared in our IP limit page. Just make sure that you switch it on. Okay, so just up here you'll see there's an IP limit switch. Obviously if you leave that disabled or switched off, then your IP limit won't be enforced. Now once you've got that in place, any clients that now connect to, this is where we bring it all together, any clients that connect to Antiference Guest, if you remember, this is the Air 3 that's broadcasting on LAN 2 within group Antiference Guest, will automatically get given an IP address that's within an IP restricted limit, which in other words means that if I connect to this now with my smartphone, I'll probably get given 172.15.0.100. that will be within the restricted group, and I'll only get 4 meg download speed. It's simple as that. So that covers bandwidth control. If you did skip the first video, because this is a two-part within the series of ClearFlow controller videos, do have a look at the other one. Might fill in a few gaps if you're not sure, but there is more information on our website at antiference.co.uk, or you can email our support team at support@antiference.co.uk. So thank you for watching.